Welcome to Cheques and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And this week, Evergrande.
All right, Mike. Over the last couple of days, we've had some clients calling us saying, hey, this Evergrande company in China, what's going on? When it comes to the financial plan, people have been going, should I change my strategy? Should I settle on this house? Should I contribute, continue contributing to my index fund? Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we've also had customers contact us like, should I buy now? Should I hold off? Is this going to impact my ability to borrow money? And it gives a really interesting sense because none of the people contacting me have been work in the financial services industry. So it just shows how apparent that how interconnected everything is now, and how that information that's coming out of China is now impacting people in New Zealand trying to buy their first house, which is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, so I mean, I love doing episodes like this one where we've got something which is in the media. People are getting content from lots of different places. It's an evolving story all the time. So we're going to try to get this recording out as quickly as we can to make sure it's still relevant when it drops. But essentially today we'll be talking about who Evergrande are, what has happened, why you should care, what are the implications, and of course the big question is, will they fall over? And what should you do, and should your strategy and the way you're dealing with your financial plan change?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Mike, let me ask you the first question. Who the hell are these guys?
Yeah, really good question. So they're a real estate company and real estate developers, founded in '96. They've got over 1,300 projects all across China, over 280 cities. Originally they were real estate developers, but like everyone sort of gets, as you get that sweet money through the front door, it's a bit hard to just stay in your lane. And I'm reminded here of probably WeWork, Tesla to a degree as well, doing all these little offshoots and things like that. So recently Evergrande has been doing things like electric cars, food and drink manufacturing. They actually went out but they didn't buy a football. They sort of bought a football team. I think it was sort of a throwaway comment from Xi Jinping, who sort of said, one day I hope China can win a football World Cup. And Evergrande went out and invested tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, in a football team to try and sort of, I guess, gain favor with the Communist Party. And that sort of shows the environment that they're working in, and how they're able, not the only reason, but one of the major reasons as to how they grow so big so quickly, and ultimately has sort of led us to the situation that they're in at the moment. That expansion comes at a cost. The way that Chinese real estate works, especially with developers, is it's not a lot of deposit for a lot of debt-funded growth. Like you might be putting a very small deposit down on the land. You're then getting some cash in from the purchasers. You're not paying your staff probably till 6 months later. There's not a lot of upfront cash, and a lot of it is sort of reliance on debt. So at the moment, their outstanding debt is around about 300 billion US. So that's
sorry, Michael.
Yeah.
Could you say that number again, please, with a emphasis on the B?
Yeah, it's really it's a funny sort of number to say, right? 300 billion. What is that? That's actually 2% of China's annual GDP. And I can't stress how big that number is if you just think of the interest payments on it and everything that goes with that, and how do you keep that machine ticking over? As soon as something goes wrong, where you can't continue to grow, which is what that sort of debt-funded growth relies on, a continuance to grow, the walls come collapsing down pretty quickly.
Mike, just to emphasize the difference between a million and a billion, I know what people know what it is on paper, but I think it was Andrew Higgs this morning on a call said a million seconds, was it 7 years or 11 years? And a billion seconds is 38 years. So yeah. $300 billion is a truckload of cash.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. So James, what has got, that's sort of the setup and who they are and how they got to be so big and what big looks like for them. Why are they falling over? What's happened?
Yeah, so like in terms of the implications here, there's several reasons why this is a really big problem. The first one is because people have, so I think you mentioned like 1,300 property construction projects on the go. So people have paid deposits for those houses. If they go under, as a very initial starting point, those people will lose their deposits, which has an implication. The second thing is that there's major losses in terms of construction design firms. Think about all the different suppliers involved with a company that has 1,300 different projects. The reliance you are on this big entity to continue to pay your bills. There will be companies that are tied to this firm for really long periods of time with extended projects. If these guys fall over, they've lost all of that, which could force those suppliers into bankruptcy.
Yeah, and you sort of think of Mainville in New Zealand there, right? When they got into trouble and locked everyone out, and traders couldn't even get their tools off the work site and stuff. So you times that by 300 billion. You can sort of see the impact of the economy. Yeah.
So there are a couple like little things around the implications, but in terms of what's happened is Beijing have brought in some new rules to control how much money real estate developers can owe. This has meant that Evergrande have gone kind of like, oh crap, we've had to do some major discounts to ensure that the money could keep floating into the business to keep the company afloat. But it's not been enough. And the result has been they're now struggling to meet some of their interest payments on their $300 billion worth of debt. Mike, I think you said there was one coming up in the next couple of days. How much is that?
It's around 83 million US, I think. Yeah, so not a small bill. That's one of your breakfast, isn't it, James? One of your brunch, annual brunch.
I'll tell you, smashed shadow is not cheap these days, especially outside of season. So this has resulted in Evergrande's share price dropping about 85%. So for a company that owns that much money, it's pretty terrifying. In the last few days, the kind of world's caught on to this. There's been some alarms go off, which has resulted in most markets around the world dropping about 2%, which in the scheme of things isn't much of a drop as well, but the markets are now starting to react.
Yeah, and this, to be honest, this isn't something that's happened over the last couple of days. Like there was, they've been red flags since as early as 2018, probably before then as well, if we've been really honest, around the amount of debt that the company has carried, their operations, and then their political risks about the fact that they can't continue to borrow. They were signaling for a number of years now that they had to reduce their debt reliance. And I won't get too far into the weeds on sort of what's led us up to this exact point, but there started to be some pretty shady stuff around stock buybacks right before earnings calls and well, not earnings calls, they don't do earnings calls, but earnings reports and these sorts of things. So the writing's been on the wall for a little while here, and what we're sort of hoping is that the financial system that surrounds them can deal with the fallout. Yeah.
So 2% of China's GDP is the equivalent of that level of debt. That's what you said, wasn't it, Mike?
Yep.
Yeah. So obviously, a company that size with that many projects, those many suppliers, there's concerns around, China's economy off the back of this. And then also the amount of banks and financial institutions that are tied to this debt. So Mike, the big question becomes, if that's what's happened, what are the implications here?
Yeah, so I mean, the implications can be sort of broken up into a few different parts. Obviously, this is going to have short-term, medium, and long-term effects on the Chinese economy. And I mean the real economy. So production workers, that transition of money as they are from those primary goods. So they produce a lot of things. So that's going to have a real impact on their economy. The the second thing there is probably, it's still part of the real economy, but the impact to their financial economy. So, they owe money to around about 171 domestic banks, around 120 other sort of financial firms. So you can imagine what that's going to look like in terms of the knock-on effect if they do default. If they do default, what happens then is, let's say you're expecting to get your weekly salary in, and it's, I don't know, let's call it, let's say it's $1,000 a fortnight, a week. Let's say you're expecting that $1,000 a week to come in, and you're giving pocket money out to your kids. All of a sudden, if that turns around, it's $200 1 week because the person paying your wage couldn't pay at all, and they only paid a little bit. All of a sudden, you might not give that pocket money out to your children. And I hope that's a quick analogy on if Evergrande defaults to their domestic banks or financial firms, they can't pass on any interest or returns or anything that they're meant to pay, but they also can't lend out money. So that could create a bit of a credit crunch there domestically in China. Most of their exposure is to Chinese-based banks and financial firms, though. So hopefully there's not too much of a contagion risk, but you simply never know these days with the insurance policies in the background and who's holding what. But yeah, so pretty much credit crunch in the world's sort of second largest economy is going to be pretty bad. This is going to be pretty unnerving for foreign investment in China as well. It'll mean that's sort of a less attractive place to put their money. You may see China start to try and bail out Evergrande, but with those sorts of numbers, pretty difficult, especially because China likes to keep a really tight grip on the value of the yuan. So if they're printing money to bail out Evergrande at that scale, they're going to devalue the yuan quite a bit, which they're not usually keen to do.
Yeah. The point you made, Mike, about whether it kind of stays somewhat contained to China or whether it kind of blows out further, just coming back to that analogy, which I really liked. It was a really good analogy around kids and their pocket money. And then maybe if you roll it forward, then the impact is on the dairy owner, which is then has an impact on all the lolly producers in the market. At some point, New Zealand, especially around the dairy industry and all the things we do with China, would feel a pinch if enough suppliers in different parts of the economy were pulled back, right?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to feel the pinch regardless. So and what that pinch is going to look like is an increase in the price of the cost of goods coming out of China. And you're already in a situation where economies are relatively weak due to COVID, the pandemic, supply chains, these sorts of things. And when I say the economy, once again, I mean the real economy here, not the stock market. So as those slight increases in costs sort of start to come out of China, that's going to have a really big impact on what's happening in New Zealand. Well, not a big impact, but you are going to see an impact in New Zealand. So there will be some contagion naturally. But what we're really hoping for is that there isn't a contagion in the financial markets. And if you think about their exposure outside of China, BlackRock, I mean, HSBC, you could argue sort of as a Chinese-based banks, and I think UBS is in there as well in the mix. So there are some pretty big players, but it's sort of yet to figure out how much of it is going to flow through to them and what that looks like. And then how does that then flow on to the rest of the world as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen some writing, whether fair or not, referring to kind of the potential Evergrande bankruptcy as China's very own Lehman Brothers and the credit implications there. But in addition to that, it's not the only thing happening in the world at the moment. If this were to happen, in addition to the global economy and the attempted recovery when it comes to COVID, there's supply chain issues out there. There's investors already nervous about what's going to happen with the US Fed, with kind of the idea of pulling back the amount of money that's getting printed.
Yeah,
and I've seen some already forecast that world markets, in terms of stock markets, might pull back like 10% because that money stops getting printed.
Yeah.
So these things in addition all start to add up, right?
Yeah, of course. So what we've given you there is a rundown of what is it, how do we get here, what does that impact look like to the market? So whether that's just a slight increase in the cost of things we're buying from China, potentially some financial contagion, maybe a credit crunch, although I can't really see that happening too much. What does this mean for you, and what should you do? So James, what are you telling clients at the moment?
Before I ask you that question, Mike, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, okay.
What do you think will happen with? Obviously, there's a lot of speculation out there. Like, do you think they're going to fall over? Do you think the government's going to bail them out? Do you think we're just going to work all this out?
Yeah, what I think will happen is you'll see they'll kick out their terms on their debt quite a bit. You're almost too big to fail, right? But I think what the unknown here is how the Chinese government will react. And, that's sometimes a little bit difficult to predict, especially, given their propensity for actually, as opposed to Western governments, sometimes the Chinese government just lets companies fall over. They'll impose regulations on their tech firms, which means they can't do a whole lot of stuff that sort of Western tech firms can do, and all of these sorts of things. I mean, they do act differently to Western governments and how they deal with issues. Personally, I anticipate that Evergrande will just kick out the terms of their debt. They'll get some type of relief or bailout from the government. The government will nationalize a lot more of the company, if not all of the company, and then we'll implement, social policy and fiscal policy around the company to try and, dig it out of the hole that it's in.
Yeah. It makes me, that kind of idea of kicking the can down the road kind of gives a similar sort of vibe to, I think it was 2016 with Greece, and remembering how long that kind of ran on for, like extending dates because it's in nobody's best interest that this happens. You're right. The Chinese government are unpredictable in terms of how they might deal with this. The really interesting point, which we mentioned right at the start, though, is the whole, they have been warned, and the whole construction and property development industry has been warned, hey, you guys are carrying too much debt. You need to pull back your levels of debt. And if you bail out a company who's in an industry which has been warned around, we want to see a change of behavior, and then they bail out the poor behavior, what is that signal to the rest of the market? So I've seen some kind of commentary along the lines of, if they do bail out, how will the rest of the industry react?
Well, I think they'll be forced to react. And what maybe they won't bail them out. Maybe they'll go, okay.
Who knows?
Well, if you think about it from a strategic perspective from the government, a cheaper way to ultimately end up at the place that the example I just gave, where they nationalize it, where they bail them out and nationalize it, is to not bail them out and nationalize it. Let the debt bounce, nationalize the company, probably sort out some of the internal issues with the financial banks in China, and all of a sudden you own the company and you haven't had to bail out foreign banks. So, potentially an avenue there for them. But what does that signal to the market? In any other economy, that would be a pretty bad signal. But what does bailing out bad behavior look like in China, and what does that signal to them? I don't know. Ask Jack Ma. I haven't seen him for a while, so it may be that even though they're bailed out, a pretty strong message is still sent around operating in China and the way that companies operate.
It's like a really big game of chicken, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, and I'm sure everyone probably knows who Jack Ma is, but he's the founder of Alibaba, who got on the wrong side of government in China and hasn't been seen for a number of months now, to any large degree. And one of the wealthiest people in China. So they can send a pretty strong message when they want to. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So to answer your question, Mike, around what should clients do? I really regurgitate, and I encourage my clients to contact me about this stuff, but regurgitate the same message consistently when these sort of things happen. And the answer is, there will always be uncertainty in the world. World events just have different names to them. but they will continue coming. Like once every, I think it's something like in the last 20 years, 15 recessions have been picked. And obviously there's really just been GFC and COVID. There will always be uncertainty in the world. It's whether it's 9/11, whether it's the tech bubble, whether it's the global financial crisis, COVID, the Great Depression, whatever it might be, there will be something that will happen every 5 to 7 years. If you are in your 30s, 40s, or even 60s, you're going to go through multiple events like this every few years. And you need to learn to, I mean, that's why diversification is so important with your strategy, that you're not too heavily dependent on one thing, because obviously if all your money was sitting in Evergrande or all your contracts were sitting with them, probably be pretty nervous right now. But if you have a well-diversified portfolio, if you have a plan that involves investment property, KiwiSaver, index funds, maybe you have your own business, you and your partner work for different businesses. It's just about holding the line, making sure that you don't panic, because panic is never, fear is never a good place to make decisions from. And you continue following your own personal financial plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay. I have loved this episode, Mike. I mean, I don't like things going wrong in the world, but it's quite fun to talk about these sort of things, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Hopefully we can get it out quick enough where this information is still relevant. It'll be a good one to look back on and see how right or how wrong we got it.
Yeah. So hopefully that's helped you understand what's going on with Evergrande, the implications, who they are. We will leave it there. Make sure to give us a subscribe and a like. Our subscribes and likes are slowly building, but we'd really like it if you supported us to help inform more people about topics like today and future ones that we'll have. Enjoy the rest of your week. For those in Auckland, enjoy your takeaways, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.